Section 1 of Abraham Lincoln, the Practical Mystic. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. Abraham Lincoln, the Practical Mystic by Francis Grierson. The Practical Mysticism of Abraham Lincoln. A knowledge of the influences which ruled the life of Lincoln, the greatest of practical mystics, is essential now that a new form of paganism and slavery threatens humanity. In Lincoln's time, the black slaves of America had to be freed. In our time, the white slaves of Europe have to be freed. We have returned to the conquest. History is being repeated, but on a far vaster scale. The whole world is groaning under the threat and deeds of tyranny that seeks to become an absolute. What Abraham Lincoln stood for in the middle of the 19th century, the English-speaking peoples must stand for at the beginning of the 20th. Materialism produces Prussian autocracy. The spiritual power brought America safely through the ordeals of the Civil War. But the material and the spiritual cannot both rule at the same time. One must yield authority to the other, and we cannot succeed by denying the very thing which caused Lincoln to triumph over all enemies and obstacles. In 1862, the Reverend Byron Sutherland went with some friends of the President to call upon him. On September the 15th, 1872, Dr. Sutherland wrote to the Reverend J. A. Reed. The President began by saying, "The ways of God are mysterious and profound beyond all comprehension. Who by searching can find him out? Now, judging after the manner of men, taking counsel of our sympathies and feelings, if it had been left to us to determine it, we would have had no war. And going farther back to the occasion of it, we would have had no evil. There is the mystery of the universe which no man can solve, and it is at that point that human understanding backs down. There is nothing left but for the heart of man to take up faith and believe where it cannot reason. Now, I believe we are all agents and instruments of divine providence. On both sides we are working out the will of God. Yet how strange the spectacle! Here is one half of the nation prostrated in prayer that God will help to destroy the Union and build up a government upon the cornerstone of human bondage. And here is the other half, equally earnest in their prayers and efforts to defeat a purpose which they regard as so repugnant to their ideas of human nature and the rights of society, as well as liberty and independence. They want slavery, we want freedom. They want a servile class. We want to make equality practicable as far as possible. And they are Christians, and we are Christians. They and we are praying and fighting for results exactly the opposite. What must God think of such a posture of affairs? There is but one solution: self-deception. Somewhere there is a fearful heresy in our religion, and I cannot think it lies in the love of liberty and in the aspirations of the human soul. I hold myself in my present position, and with the authority invested in me as an instrument of providence. I have my own views and purposes. I have my convictions of duty and my ideas of what is right to be done. But I am conscious every moment that all I am and all I have is subject to the control of a higher power. Nevertheless, I am no fatalist. I believe in the supremacy of the human conscience, and that men are responsible beings, that God has a right to hold them, and will hold them, to a strict personal account for the deeds done in the body. God alone knows the issue of this business. He has destroyed nations from the map of history for their sins. Nevertheless, my hopes prevail generally above my fears for our republic. The times are dark. The spirits of ruin are abroad in all their power, and the mercy of God alone can save us. The Divine Will. September 30th, 1862, when everything looked dark and the future of America was uncertain, Lincoln wrote the following meditation on the divine will. The will of God prevails. In great contests, each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Both may be, one must be wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time.
In the present civil war, it is quite possible that God's purpose is something different from the purpose of either party, and yet the human instrumentalities, working just as they do, are of the best adaptation to effect His purpose. I am almost ready to say this is probably true, that God wills this contest, and wills that it shall not end yet. By His great power on the minds of the contestants, He could have either saved or destroyed the Union without war. Yet the contest began, and having begun, He could give the final victory to either side any day. Yet the contest proceeds.
The mystical awakening. A mystical epoch is upon us, and like all vital movements, it has come without systematic propaganda and without organized effort. The world upheaval did not cause this new movement. It has simply advanced it by stripping materialism of its elusive trappings and showing it naked to the civilized world. It is not the work of one man or any single group, sect, or nation. Its characteristics are Anglo-American, and its development will prove the only antidote to the new pagan culture, which opposes not only Christian morals, but everything that places the spiritual above the material. Abraham Lincoln, the greatest practical mystic the world has known for 1900 years, is the one man whose life and example ought to be clearly set before the English-speaking peoples at this supreme climax in the history of civilization. The thoughts, incidents, manifestations which the majority of historians glide over with a careless touch or sidetrack because of the lack of moral courage are the only things that count in the life of that great seer. His whole existence was controlled by influences beyond the ken of the most astute politicians of his time. His genius was superhuman, and since this world is not governed by chance, a power was at work which foreordained him for his unique mission. W. H. Herndon has this to say in his biography of the immortal statesman. Nature had burned into him her holy fire and stamped him with the seal of her greatness. In other words, the seal of the practical mystic, which may be taken as the keynote to the spiritual theme of his marvelous experiences, for it is futile to continue to harp on Lincoln's political acumen, his knowledge of law, his understanding of the people, his judgment of individuals, his poverty, his disregard of the conventional, as causes of his greatness. The same may be said of thousands of others, yet there is no other Lincoln. To arrive at a just appreciation of the man and his achievements, I felt it essential to read very carefully all the books written by those most intimate with the great president, a study which has required a period of 30 years. The writing of The Valley of Shadows was one of the results of that study, that book being, as far as I could make it, a depiction of the spiritual atmosphere of the Lincoln country and Lincoln's time, the atmosphere in which he lived and moved, thought and worked. Too long has the materialism of weights and bushel measures dimmed the light that shines from the example of that incomparable seer. Too long have politicians used his name to fish for gudgeons in the muddy waters of sectional politics. Too long has Lincoln been held up in speeches and electioneering maneuvers as a politician who arrived because he was honest, as if Webster, Calhoun, Clay, Sumner, and scores of others were not equally honest without ever attaining a world influence. What caused Lincoln's honesty? His conscience. And what created his conscience? His innate mystical knowledge of the difference between good and evil, philosophers and puppets, the solemn dignity of duty and the sham dignity of ambition. His was the clear vision in the darkest hour, while others were magnifying events through long-distance spectacles or minimizing them in near-sighted details. The mystical trend now visible in England and America is not a revival but a renaissance. It has come in the natural course of events, being the only thing that responds to the spiritual aspirations and needs of the dispensation ushered in by the Great War. The renaissance of practical mysticism is now apparent both in and outside the churches, but its great influence is exerted on the large class which, before the war, had no religious convictions of any kind. We have arrived at a climax in history. Old methods and systems are passing, but not the old fundamental truths. Conditions, not principles, have changed, and our attitude towards things has changed with conditions. Thousands can now see clearly where once they saw through a veil of agnosticism. It required a mighty force to lift the veil, and a vast amount of machinery and metaphysics had to combine to accomplish such a miracle. But the miracle is here, alive with a vital flame unknown since the days of the prophets and the apostles. The spiritual renaissance is not a drawing-room fad. It is not founded on a passing whim. Novelties and opinions shift with the wind, and people who are influenced by them are influenced by shadows. Mere notions can never take the place of ideas. Novelties possess no fundamental basis on which the spirit of man can build, and the difference between an idea and a notion is the difference between a university and a lunatic asylum. The spiritual renaissance is not confined to any particular profession, and this is why it is making headway among people of such diverse views. The war has crushed the juice out of the orange on the tree of pleasure, and nothing is left but the peel over which materialism is slipping to its doom. This stupendous movement was not sprung upon the world in a night. It has had its slow stages of development. Everything comes and goes in cycles which are graded in kind and proceed in accordance with immutable law. This spiritual movement has had its special phases of preparation. It is not true that the voices of the prophets have been inaudible. What is true is that every voice that has sounded since the dawn of historical civilization has been heard and heeded. Emerson uttered a great mystical truth when he said, "A book written for three will gravitate to three," and similarly, a voice intended for three will be heard and heeded by three. The agnostic and the mystic. Herndon's agnosticism left no lasting impression on the mind of Lincoln. Lincoln was more or less influenced by Herndon at the beginning of their acquaintance, but such influence did not last long. This is remarkable, because Herndon was a man with a powerful originality and a strong will. Another curious thing is that Mr. Herndon, in spite of his probity, his practical ability, and his talent as a lawyer, never became known beyond his own state. He never was put forward as a leader. Perhaps he entertained no particular ambition to lead, being too much of a philosopher, but the remark is in order that what was lacking in his temperament was just a spark of the mystical illumination which gave Lincoln his faith, his conviction, and his power. No doubt Herndon was singularly fitted for the position he held with Lincoln for the space of 20 years. Had he been a leader in public affairs, he could not have aided Lincoln as he did. That the great president never had a mentor is plain to all who have studied the best biographies. He did sometimes act upon suggestions from friends in matters of minor importance in his private affairs. When one day, after he had become president, Mrs. Lincoln informed him that the gossips declared he was being ruled by Seward, his reply was, "I may not rule myself out, certainly Seward shall not. The only rule is my conscience, following God in it, and these men will have to learn that yet." And Seward did learn it, as well as Stanton and Chase and every member of the cabinet, and all others who came within the radius of his mystical circuit. Indeed, the generals all learnt it, some of them to their sorrow, long before the war ended. Lincoln's authority became apparent to all whenever he delivered a speech on important occasions. Then, as Judge Whitney has said, he was as terrible as an army with banners. Colonel Henry Watterson, in his memorable address before the Lincoln Union in Chicago, puts the question, where did Shakespeare get his genius? Where did Mozart get his music? Whose hand smote the lyre of the Scottish ploughman? God alone. And if Lincoln was not inspired of God, then there is no such thing as special providence or the interposition of divine powers in the affairs of men. End of section 1.